Hey, this is Lavana from Silver Lining Psychotherapy. I was just hanging out in my office on this afternoon and relaxing, and I started thinking about a lot of the misconceptions I hear as a gender therapist about sexuality and gender. So I want to talk about that a little bit today. There are basically four different categories related to gender and sexuality, and I want to talk about each of them and then explain a little bit more. So, the first category is biological sex, and that's referring to, biologically how you were born, which reproductives you were born with. Were you born with male reproductive organs, female, or intersex, which is where you have some of each male and female reproductive organs? The second category is gender. Now, gender is more of a perception of yourself as opposed to something physical about you. So, when you're born, if you are born a boy, most of the time you're assigned that gender. So, you're raised as a boy, you're socialized as a boy, you're treated as a boy. And so, everything related to being a boy is considered gender. What kind of activities you do, what is expected of you as a male. And so people who don't identify with the gender they were raised in, they identify with a different gender, are considered transgender. And people who identify with the gender that they were born into biologically are considered cisgender. That's the term for it. The third category is gender expression. And gender expression is how you choose to express yourself and what that says about your gender. So, in our society, we have certain expectations about how men should dress, how women should dress, and what each gender should be doing, what their mannerisms should be, what activities they participate in. And so that's kind of the way you express yourself in relation to your gender. And the last thing is your sexuality, and that relates to who you're attracted to. Are you attracted to somebody of the same gender, of the opposite gender, and so forth? And who do you choose to be in romantic relationships with? Who you choose to be physically intimate with? So, all of those four categories are separate, meaning none of them are dependent on each other. Just because you are transgender doesn't mean that you're attracted to one gender or the other. Or just because you dress a certain way doesn't mean you identify with any kind of gender. And that's where people get confused a lot. Sexuality, gender, gender expression, and sex are all separate aspects of all of us. And we all have different inclinations that are not related to each other. Now, to further blur the lines with these things, the last three categories, which are gender, gender expression, and sexuality, instead of seeing them in a binary way, meaning male and female, we choose to look at them on a spectrum. Meaning there's some people who consider themselves transgender from male to female. There's some people who don't identify with any gender at all. There's people who identify with a little bit of one and a lot of the other. And there's people who fully identify with both genders. So there's a lot of variation. There's a huge spectrum of how people identify on a gender spectrum. Same thing with gender expression. Some people fully and completely express themselves in the way that our society expects people of that gender to express themselves, with their clothing, with their mannerisms, and so forth. And then there are some people who are on the opposite extreme, where they express themselves towards the opposite gender. And then, of course, any variance in between. And lastly, sexuality. I think we're all familiar with gay, lesbian, and bisexual. There are people who don't have any sexuality whatsoever, that consider themselves asexual. There are many other different kinds of people who identify with different sexualities, such as being pansexual, people who are attracted to anybody regardless of their gender or sex. So there's a lot of variation out there, And as soon as we can accept these differences about each other, and as soon as we can say, I may not understand it, I may not relate to this, but I accept that about you, even if it doesn't make 100% sense to me, the sooner we can all get along better and be more accepting of each other. And really, the differences is what makes us interesting. And so I hope you learn from this today, and I hope you can see anyone who is not exactly, the quote unquote norm, who doesn't fit the mold, as beautiful and wonderful and possessing their own uniqueness. If you'd like to learn more about this, if you'd like to discuss this with me, feel free to call me at 614-309-4999. You can email me at silverpsychotherapy@gmail.com, or check out my website, www.silverliningspsychotherapy.com. Have a great weekend and take care.